Okay, so one of the things that people say is, aren't we better off, like as a society or as culture, without religion? And that is something that you may not hear, obviously, when you hang out with Christians. This is something that you hear on the internet, or if you're with non-believers. You know, a lot of people have bought into this idea. It's an idea that's perpetuated in culture, and it's because people they don't know their history very well. And so they don't understand where a lot of things have come from. And a lot of it started, believe it or not, in the 60s with John Lennon's Imagine song. You know, maybe he said, imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. And he goes on and says, you know, about, you know, just we're all going to sit there and be peaceful without God, basically. And so that idea started in the 60s and 70s. And so he had an anti-religious anthem of unity across ideological differences. So he thought that we could just be good for goodness sakes. So he was also once quoted that the Beatles are more famous than Jesus.
Oh,
John Lennon.
Right.
Yeah, he actually got so full of that. So yeah, so I wonder sometimes if, you know, when you get that pompous, I mean, you wonder why his end. I mean, I'm not saying God did that, but God certainly didn't protect him from that.
Yeah.
You know, and so it makes me wonder. It's like, you know, I have a healthy fear of God. If I was going to say that, that's not something that, you know, I think you just don't want to go and say something like that.
Lisa's more popular than Jesus. There you go.
I'm sorry?
Yep. Lisa's.
I know. Yeah. And then he also said something about, remember he says that, you know, no religion, that it will have nothing to kill or die for. But if you think about North Korea has no religion, and they have plenty to kill and die for. Right? So this is an ideology that has been perpetuated, and it's wishful thinking, you guys. He greatly overestimates human goodness. And that's the problem, is that this greatly overestimates human goodness. Because we all want to believe we're good, right? It's hard to, it's like, you know, that's part of Christianity, is you have to admit you're a sinner. You have to admit that you need a Savior. You have to admit that, you know, I'm not good enough on my own. God makes me good. You know, and lots of people they don't like to hear that. They want to think that we can be good on our own. And so that idea started with John Lennon perpetuating it, and it started before then, but I think he made it really popular with that song. That song is still like one of the most popular songs ever. You know, and I like the melody. I just don't like the message, you know?
Yeah.
So let's contrast that to another vision, and this is Martin Luther King's vision. 8 years before the song Imagine came out, was released, Martin Luther King shared another dream. And his dream is rooted in faith, with the glory of the Lord revealed. In Isaiah 40, verse 4, it says, every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low. And the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. So his dream was that the unity would come through Christ. So John Lennon's was the unity is going to come through, everyone is going to be good enough and whatever, and Martin Luther King said, you know, it's only going to happen through faith. So the question we have to ask ourselves then is, which vision is correct? Right? Which vision is correct? So despite the naysayers, religion is actually growing globally, not necessarily in Europe or the United States, but in China, Africa, Latin American countries. If you look at this chart here, this is a global religious population projection. And by the year 2050, you can see we're definitely not shrinking. So the whole, like, imagine there's no religion, it's not going to happen. So Islam is growing a lot, and the reason why Islam is growing is primarily because they have a higher birth rate. So a lot of Islam has grown purely because people are born into Islam, and they're never shown Christianity because they're not allowed to. Because Islam is illegal. If you're in an Islamic country, you're not allowed to know of Christianity. Matter of fact, if you make a copy of the Bible, you can get thrown in jail or killed.
Yeah.
But Christianity is still going to be growing. So which vision is correct? Obviously, Martin Luther King's vision was correct. John Lennon was wrong, and that's, you know, a lot of people don't like to believe that. They still are looking for utopia that we can create on our own power, and so religion actually does help a lot of things, and it helps people be better. And so this whole aren't we better off without religion, argument is not a very strong one. But it's been argued a lot, and it's been argued a lot by the new atheists. They call them the new atheists. They're not so new anymore, but they came into popularity after 9/11. All four atheists wrote New York Times best-selling books. So they brought their worldview to the forefront of culture through those books. And so you've got Sam Harris, who is the black and white picture guy. He wrote The End of Faith in 2004. Richard Dawkins wrote The God Delusion. Daniel Dennett, who's the bearded guy, he wrote this thing called Breaking the Spell: Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. He was trying to not spiritual. It's because of some sort of biochemical need for religion. Because he's totally, a naturalist. And when I say a naturalist, that doesn't mean people who love nature, right? It means that they believe in only nature only, that they don't believe in anything supernatural, okay? And then you have this other guy, Christopher Hitchens, who I have a line for him because he's passed away. He died a few years ago, but he was very vocal. All these guys are super vocal. He wrote a book called God Is Not Great. So here are all the books that they wrote. And all these books got, just flying off the shelves, New York Times bestsellers. And so the idea of religion being bad was perpetuated by these New York Times bestsellers. And people started talking about them, and they go on, all these chat rooms on social media. And so the ball really started rolling after 9/11, because what happened is these guys got scared, and the Islams, took down, the Twin Towers, and they saw, oh my gosh, all religion is bad for us. Let's just get rid of all religion. And Sam Harris' point where he wrote The End of Faith. And Christopher Hitchens, God Is Not Great. I don't have that book. I have the God Delusion, and I have The End of Faith, and I read parts of Breaking the Spell, because as a Christian apologist, I have to read this stuff, and I have to know what these people are saying, and it's really hard to read it. It's hard because they write well, they argue well, they're pretty convincing. If I didn't know the truth, I could be swayed. Yeah. And so people don't know the truth, and they read it, they just get sucked into that worldview,
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's kind of the backstory of how we got to the point where people think we're better off without religion, because it's been building for the last 20 years or more, starting with, songs like John Lennon's song. But here's the tricky thing, is that oftentimes these people, they borrow concepts from our religion, from Christianity, without realizing they're really borrowing concepts. This is a Frank Turek's quote. He said, atheists can't make a positive case for their materialistic worldview without stealing immaterial realities from the theistic God in the process. So the immaterial realities that they like to steal from would be an immaterial reality that all people are their human value. That comes from the Christian worldview, because the Christian worldview says we are all created in the image of God. And if every single person is created in the image of God, regardless if they're Christian or not, that gives them inherent value, right? Yes. And so once you become a Christian, then you're adopted into the kingdom of God, and then that's a whole different paradigm. But nonetheless, even if a person is not a Christian, they still have value. In the atheistic worldview, there really is nothing to ground that value. They're basically you're highly evolved animal. So why should you be any more important than another animal? Yeah. So they're grounding, they're borrowing from our worldview, the whole, secular humanism borrows from the worldview that all people are created in the image of God. So these are the kind of things that they don't think through, I think. It's like if you really start thinking through the atheistic worldview, it's very empty, and it gives no human value at all. There's no reason why we should have human rights. In other words, there's no reason why, if you see a dolphin drowning or a kid drowning, well, why should you save the kid versus the dolphin? The dolphin's cute. Let's save the dolphin. So these are the kinds of things that I think people just don't really think through. And so oftentimes when you hear these little quick, quotes thrown around. It's because they haven't really thought that through. So sometimes what you could do is you could just ask people. You just ask them, one of the really good questions, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? And oftentimes they're like, I don't know. They don't know, or maybe they'll expound a little bit more, and then you can just ask more questions, and you can start asking them questions. You don't always have to have the answers. And I know I've said that a lot, but it's really important that you remember that, because oftentimes I think Christians feel like we're on the defensive all the time. And it's like oftentimes, hey, we know what we believe and why we believe it. We have good grounding for why we believe it. But these other people are borrowing ideas from religion, really. So what's happened because of all of this is there's this thing called the rise of the nuns. N-O-N-E-S, not Catholic nuns. But for instance, incoming college freshmen claim no religious affiliation. And then this is an increase of 10% in 10 years. So oftentimes by the time they're leaving high school and going into college, they're pretty much lost their faith. But there's still the majority of college students still do identify as religious. To what extent is not clear, but believe are not claiming atheism. But you can see from the 1940s there was only 5%, and now today we have 33% of adults under the age of 30 claiming no religion. And so they're not necessarily saying they're atheists, but they're just basically, they don't see a need for religion, or they just feel like they're sort of apathetic about it. It's like, well, maybe there is, or maybe I don't see how that applies to my life. So this is the conundrum. I mean, that's basically 1/3 of the younger generation. 1/3. That's huge. I mean, it never used to be like that. 5%. Back in the 1940s. So we've really, it's less than 100 years, and we've really, lost a lot of believers, and we've lost a lot of ground in helping people understand how God can work in their lives, like why that is important. And so one of the things that we have to do as Christians is show them why Christianity is attractive. Like why, your testimonies are really good. Like, Linda's testimony about, hey, I've been praying and God's opening the doors, and, this is really cool, and I'm really excited about life, because it gives you hope. We have hope. We have, we know that when this life ends, it's not over, and that's something that I think we need to start focusing more on, and helping people realize, that they're getting entertained to death, basically. They're so into video games and movies and their phone, and they're plugged in all the time. And so what's happened is they're entertaining themselves to death. So we have to help them to slow down and to contemplate and to be okay with being quiet. It's okay to unplug, right? So here's the interesting thing. Here's we talked about this briefly last time. The writer goes into how research has shown now that those who regularly attend religious services are more optimistic and have lower rates of depression. They're less likely to commit suicide. There's greater purpose in life, less likely to divorce, and are more self-controlled. So saying religion is bad for you is exactly opposite of what the research shows. So this is a lie. Religion is bad for you is a lie. And so we need to, again, in a gentle and a respectful way, help people to see that, So I think that that's really interesting that, religion actually shows that people are happier. And it's based, again, on biblical principles. And so there's the benefits of 7 biblical principles here that she talks about. So the effects of a Christian worldview on culture is much better than critics claim. And one of the biblical principles, number 1, is it's more blessed to give than to receive. And that's in Acts chapter 20, verse 35. So research suggests that giving is actually good for us. Volunteering has a positive impact on mental and physical health. And religious people are more generous financially than secular folks. So, without religious people, we probably have a lot less charity and a lot less volunteerism. And it's rooted in this verse, Acts 20, verse 35. Biblical principle number 2, the love of money disappoints. There are several scriptures, Matthew 19, verses 23 through 24, Mark 10:25, Luke 18, 24 through 25, and 1 Timothy 6:12. I'll talk about that. So becoming well off financially is actually overtaken raising a family as a top priority. So people now rather have riches than a family because they think that that's more important, that that's going to make them happy. Well, research has shown that wealth only has a small direct effect on happiness. So if you invest your life in money over relationships, the returns will not satisfy. Think of Scrooge.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Christmas shows, right? But if you think about it, he was all about, all of his life, making money, and he ended up being a miserable little man. And so, this is another lie of our culture, right? The love of money. It's a lie. It's not going to make you happy. Now, there is research. There's a certain point of poverty, though. I mean, so I'm not saying it's okay to be poor. I mean, if there's a certain level that once you hit in that poverty line, then you're miserable. But they're saying that once you make X amount of money, well, if you make that much more, you're not going to be any happier. So there's like a sort of a middle income is pretty much a happiness level, and there have been stories of people who've made like millions and millions, and they get there, and then they're not happy, and they think that's because I need to make another million, and they keep on making money. It's almost like an addiction. It's like they feel like they haven't gotten whatever it was they were looking for, and so they keep on trying to accumulate wealth, thinking that that's going to be the answer, and it's not. It's not going to be the answer. So that's biblical principle number 2. Biblical principle number 3 is work is seen as a calling. That comes also from a Christian worldview in Colossians 3:22 through 24. It talks about that. It says that Christians are called to seek and see work as part of their worship. We work as unto the Lord, no matter what the job. So, for instance, she talked about this in the book about the attitude of janitors, for instance, being a part of a team, and seeing it as a janitor, be kind of a low job. A lot of people would see that as no big deal. But if you're seeing yourself, I'm a janitor, I'm helping keeping this place clean, which ultimately helps people stay healthy. So I'm preserving people's health. So if you see it as a calling and you're recognizing, hey, God sees me and God doesn't care what I do for a living. He cares the attitude I have behind it. And so, that's another biblical principle that shows that, job satisfaction when you view work as a calling is a lot higher. Okay? Biblical principle number 4, happy in all circumstances. So in Philippians 4, verses 12 through 13, Paul talks about that. He espoused the idea of being content in all circumstances. And then modern psychology supports that. They say that when we have an ability to synthesize happiness, it immunizes us against suffering. It doesn't prevent suffering, but it helps us to cope with it. So, modern psychology is catching up with the Bible. So, what would be some good examples of that? Like it doesn't, this attitude that Paul has, it doesn't necessarily say, okay, we have to just grit our teeth and try to be happy no matter what, right? He's not necessarily saying that. There's a difference between that. I think what he's trying to say, be content in all circumstances. Again, it doesn't prevent suffering, but it helps us to cope with it. How does it help us to cope with it?
Because of our faith, because we know that God will see us through it. Whatever happens, He's going to be there with us.
Right. Yep.
I think too that you realize that there's a purpose behind it, or that there is He's going to take it and work it for good, but there's something that is happening there. I like the scripture. It says that we share in Christ's sufferings, and that makes us more united to Him.
It's hard, but sometimes the best lessons we learn are lessons we learn when we're suffering, unfortunately. But you learn a lot in that. And like you said, if you know that God's in it with you and that something good will come out of it eventually, that helps you cope. It does. Okay, biblical principle number 5, an attitude of gratitude. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 talks about that. And they've done studies and they say conscious daily gratitude is literally good for you. Those who keep a gratitude journal feel better about their lives. And it shows that thankfulness is not just a positivity technique. It's a deep attitude of gratitude toward a life-giving and life-saving God. So what Linda, you were saying earlier too about keeping a journal, when you can journal your prayers and then answer and then write down the answers to the prayers, and then you go back and you read and you're like, oh my gosh, so many times we forget all the little prayers that God actually does answer, So attitude of gratitude is huge. And, God calls us to that, calls us to be thankful for him and thankful for what he's done for our lives. And so we're supposed to live in sort of a perpetual thankfulness. So these are all things, you guys, they're religious in their roots, and they're good for society, And so this whole thing about, religion being bad for society, they are so wrong about that, right? And here's another one, number 6, self-control and perseverance. So, that's a hard one for our culture. Our culture, really likes to say, hey, indulge yourself because you're worth it. Remember that hair commercial? I'm worth it. But God says the exact opposite, right? And so, Christians are called to self-control and perseverance, and perseverance and self-control appear to be key predictors of a flourishing across a range of indexes. So it helps people she was talking about grit. Like when you have grit, that's that kind of that perseverance, that people actually are more successful. They don't even have to be that talented if they've got grit. If they've got perseverance, if they're willing to hang in there, it's like, I'm not going to quit. Even if they're not that, super talented, if sometimes talent doesn't get you. It's grit that gets you there, It's like, I'm just not going to give up. And so that comes from a biblical principle. And it really is important too, to have self-control in a culture that is perpetuating indulgence and instant gratification. Because, if you have self-control, then you'll be able to resist temptations that ultimately will hurt you in the long run, right? So speaking about that, I'm not going to talk real long about that, about this one thing, but I don't know if you guys heard, because I'm in the apologetics field, Robbie Zacharias, have you heard about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they did a whole report on him, and actually his ministry called RZIM, his international ministry, had heard about these things, and they thought that the women were just making up the stories. Because, you think about Robbie, you're like, oh, he preached all these great things, and he did all this great, globally. Mike Pence even came to his funeral. It's like, this guy was huge, right? But he was into, this double life. And he wanted this, he didn't have the self-control, and he wanted instant gratification. He had a bad back problem. And so he started out with massage therapists, right? And he just, because he had a bad back, and he was making all these excuses for why he needed a massage. It wasn't just a massage, though. He'd go in there, and he'd want a massage. And sometimes, the women would capitulate, and then he actually raped a couple of them. And I was like, I can't even imagine. Robbie Zacharias was one of the reasons why I got interested in apologetics.
Yeah.
Because I loved his radio show called Let My People Think.
Yeah.
I love that. And his whole voice, the way his Indian accent and everything, he just has such a good delivery. And it goes to show you that just because somebody has a good delivery and they're polished and they can do all this fancy stuff, it's like, you know what? Ultimately, what matters is what you do behind closed doors when nobody else sees.
Yeah.
So self-control and perseverance, those kind of things, obviously Robbie Zacharias missed that memo. But I was pretty bummed, and the whole apologetics field, everyone's talking about it, and writing blogs on it, doing videos on it, and how could we have missed this, and that kind of thing, and you never know, you never know, so. Anyways, and then the last principle is a really super good one. Obviously, this is the best one, is forgiveness. And this is another biblical principle that actually helps society a lot. Forgiveness is linked to a positive mental and physical health outcome. And they've done studies on that. They've done studies on how sometimes people will hold unforgiveness so strongly in their bodies that they actually get sick from it. You know, and there's more than just, you know, medicine. I mean, it's not, you can't just slap a Band-Aid on some of this stuff. You really need to go into a heart level and deal with this kind of stuff. So anyways, forgiveness is foundational to Christianity. Forgiven people must forgive. I must forgive Robbie. I'm working on it. Forgiveness is linked to positive and mental and physical health outcomes. So this is not an abandonment to justice, rather acknowledging that final justice lies in the hands of God.
Yeah.
So Christians are called to protect the weak and the vulnerable, but not seek revenge or vindication. This is grounded in the radical forgiveness of God, and Luke chapter 23, verse 34 talks about that. So that's another thing we have to remember. It's like, you know, a lot of people have this vengeance thing and they want to do it in their own strength, you know, and they want to see justice done. And obviously we have, you know, laws and stuff like that in the courts, and that's all part of the deal. But there are sometimes, you know, you don't see forgiveness, you don't see justice on somebody who wronged you, you know, and you don't see that, and you're like, okay, poor Robbie, I'm doing Robbie. But he's a good example right now, he's fresh. He died before all of this really came out. And so the women who he had hurt, they're like, oh my gosh, you know, he died and I'm never going to see justice. Well, guess what? God brought it up. God brought it up. And so God did see, you know, God, and you know, he had to stand before God too. You know, and I think about that, I'm like, gosh, I wouldn't want to be Robbie, you know, standing before God with all that. But God, I think this 2020, you guys, 2020 has been such a crazy year. So many things have been revealed. You know, it's like so many like injustices and just all kinds of stuff. So I just find it really interesting that the Robbie thing came in and all this other stuff has happened, you know, it's like crazy. So, in conclusion, are we better off without religion?
No.
We are not better off without religion when grounded in Christian principles. Now that's the difference, right?
Yes.
If it's grounded in Muslims, unfortunately, their religion's not that great. They have some things that they borrow from Christianity, but their Quran is very anti-infidel. So if you're not a believer in Allah, you're an infidel, and it does say to kill the infidel in there. In Christianity, all Jesus says is just wipe the dust off your feet and go on. That's all he ever says. He doesn't say go and kill him. You know, it's like no.
Well, in fact, when they wanted to call down fire from heaven and consume them, you know, Jesus said to him, you don't know what spirit you're of.
Yeah.
So
It's good. Yeah. Studies show that religious people have a happiness advantage. Did you know you're happier because you are a believer?
yeah.
Religion does not poison everything, as the new atheists would have us believe, but actually promotes human thriving. So without these concepts, without the intrinsic value of people being created in the image of God, would we even care to save the orphan? Would we care to, you know? I mean, you think about it, we probably wouldn't. So religion is the basis of civil society and the source of all good and all comfort. Is there any questions you guys have?
I just want to say something. Maybe it's somewhere else in the book, because I haven't read the book, but hasn't the Christian religion been good for women